Welcome everybody. My name is Bruce Robertson. I'm the Independent Chair of the Gaming Machine Association of New Zealand. We were established to represent the fundraising sector from pokies, so we represent the majority of the gaming societies, the venues, the manufacturers. This is a group which collectively raises over 320 million for the community and a similar amount for the government in the form of tax and GST. We're an organisation which are committed to being evidence-based. We think that our advocacy is evidence-based, and it's as a result of developing really good relationships with the key stakeholders to ensure that the fundraising sector is able to continue to raise funds and distribute them to the community and do a lot of community good. In 2017, we became aware of a piece of research called the Burden of Harm Report. This report concerned us because it seemed to be extreme in its claims about the burden of harm from gaming, particularly gaming machines. When we looked at the Burden of Harm report, it was making claims such as that if you had a habit of buying the odd lotto ticket now and again, then you were considered to be harmed to a significant degree. The level of harm this report suggests you might have is that if you buy the odd lotto ticket, then the harm is equivalent to a heart attack or having a limb amputated and let go untreated. Now, to us, that seemed absurd. So we commissioned TDB to have a serious analysis of it because we're not experts. So we called on the experts to review this piece of work to provide a qualitative analysis as to its real value. And frankly, we were shocked by the reviewers' findings. This is a piece of research which unfortunately politicians, public servants and local government have relied on for policy advice. If it wasn't so serious, this would be a joke. We are really concerned that this continues to be used by the government to set things like the problem gambling levy, by local government to establish local government policies, and we really want this report to be withdrawn. It should not be used by anybody to develop any public policy. So I'd like to hand over to Phil, who can talk about the review of the Burden of Harm report. Phil.
My name is Philip Barry. I'm a founding director of Independent Economic Experts TDB Advisory. TDB Advisory provides independent expert advice to a number of large corporates, to the central government, to local government, and in the courts. As Bruce mentioned, we were commissioned by the Gaming Machine Association to provide an independent and review of the Burden of Harm report. So that Burden of Harm report was a study conducted by the Central Queensland University and by the Auckland University of Technology. I'll refer to it as the CQU AUT report. That report was about 250 odd pages long and cost over $319,000. It's been cited at least 15 times in advice to ministers and submissions to regulatory processes. So what did the CQU AUT study do? There were 4 phases to the project. Firstly, they did a review of academic literature, fine, on gambling harm. Secondly, they refined and expanded the definition of gambling-related harm and produced a list of some 83 potential harms into 6 different categories. So harm, for example, to your financial situation, to your family relationships, etc. They then undertook a survey of around 1,500 participants to estimate the frequency of those harms occurring. And then finally, they estimated the impacts of those harms on people's quality of life, and as well, both in terms of the impact on an individual gambler and also estimated it across the total economy. So what did they find? As Bruce indicated, they found some fairly startling and almost incredible results. They found, for example, that low-risk gambling was as bad for people's health as having a limb amputated. So this is, your mother, my mother, who goes down to the pokies on a Friday night. Apparently that's doing damage to her, and not just little damage, but actually severe damage to her health. Remember, that's the low-risk gamblers. Then there are the real problem gamblers, the people who do have addictions, who have serious problems. Well, the CQU AUT study found that for those people, that gambling habit, addiction, was as bad for their health as having terminal cancer or severe dementia. Nearly as bad as having untreated AIDS. And what about the overall picture? When they looked across the total economy, they concluded that gambling causes much harm as diabetes and arthritis, and 3 times the amount of harm as drug use and disorders. So this slide, which comes from the CQU AUT, just gives an assessment of how of the damage that CQU AUT estimated was from gambling, compared to some other health issues. So, for example, low-risk gambling, that rated, as we said, more damaging than having your leg amputated, and just about as bad as having a severe heart failure. Now remember, we're talking here not problem gamblers, but low-risk gambling, which is defined by the Problem Gaming Index as a gambler who likely will not have experienced any adverse consequences from gambling. I.e., you're my mum who's quite happy to lose $20 a week and get a bit of social interaction and perhaps divert her mind from some of the problems that actually really do worry her. Problem gambling, as I said, that's worse apparently than having a severe stroke, and almost as bad as untreated AIDS. And how did they find these results? I mean, essentially it was by using selective use of studies, choosing studies that gave them high numbers that suited them. Secondly, by overinflating their estimates. And thirdly, by making caveats in the text, but then ignoring those caveats in the quantitative analysis that led to overinflated results. So our role was to undertake a rigorous and independent assessment of the CQU AUT study and test whether it was actually fit for purpose for policy making or regulatory decisions. In a nutshell, we found 3 major errors or major issues with the study. Firstly, it attributes 100% of the harm associated with gambling to gambling and not to other issues that people have. Often people who gamble might misuse alcohol at the same time. They might smoke, they might use drugs. Those things cause harm as well. But the AUT study ignored or didn't quantify the impact of those other factors and attributed all the problems to one factor, gambling. Secondly, it assumed that the direction of causation was from gambling and from gambling to the harm, rather than perhaps gambling being a way of coping with some of the problems that people have. And then thirdly, as I said, it used selectively estimates from other studies in a way that just biased upwards its results. So there's no, looking at that first one, the attribution of all harm to one factor, gambling. We know very well from the literature that gambling doesn't occur in isolation. but is often associated with other harmful behaviours that people undertake. We call those comorbidities. So those comorbidity factors, for example, are misuse of alcohol, drugs, tobacco. The AUT study identified those comorbidities, recognised that they could be important, but then ignored them in its quantitative estimates. And in fact, the AUT study itself noted that their methodology will overinflate its results, its own estimates. So in fact, instead of taking a conservative approach and sort of erring on the side of caution, if you like, they took the approach that gave the largest possible number that they could attribute to gambling. Same sort of problem with the second issue, the treating causation as running in one direction, gambling causing the harm rather than being a way of coping with problems. It's well recognised that the direction of causation could be one way or the other. And again, the CQU AUT study recognises that issue. But when it comes to the quantification of the harm, from gambling, they assumed 100% direction in one way. So again, not a conservative, not probably even a reliable approach. They took the least conservative approach possible. And then the third point that we have serious concerns about was the selective use of studies. One example, CQU AUT estimated that 161,000 years of healthy life are lost across the whole of New Zealand as a result of gambling. How did they get that? Well, they estimated the damage to individuals, then multiplied that by the number of gamblers. Straightforward enough. But how many gamblers are there who are actually in these categories: low risk, moderate risk, high risk, problem gamblers? Well, we've got at least 3 good studies that have been done on that. So let me just go to the next slide. So there's a study by the National Gambling Survey, the National Gambling Study in 2012. There was a study by Health and Lifestyle Survey, and there was a study called the New Zealand Health Survey. Those 3 studies are very well known to the academics and to the Ministry of Health, and they give quite different, or they give a range of estimates. That's fine. It's not a precise science. The problem is that CQU AUT only used one of those studies, and they used the study that estimated the greatest number of problem gamblers. So they used this figure, 0.6, whereas another study, just as credible, just as reliable, estimated only 0.1% of the population. That gives you a six-fold difference there. Why not use an average of the 3 studies? That would be a number, around 0.3, 0.4. But instead of doing that, they used the highest number in each category. That choice alone overinflated the harm supposedly caused by gambling by around 50 to 100%. So instead of saying 161,000 years lost, remember we said that was their estimate, maybe it's only 50,000, maybe it's only 80,000. All depends what you assume about how many people there are who gamble. So, drawing it all together, TDB, of course, is not suggesting that gambling doesn't cause harm. We don't want to downplay that harm in any way, but the calculation of that harm should be sound and robust and take into account all the factors that need to be considered. We want rigorous evidence-based analysis. And of course, any public policy advice around what to do about gambling should be based on an assessment not only of the costs of gambling, but also the benefits. The fact that people, enjoy a little flutter. People that's something they choose to do voluntarily. that aspect, the benefits, was not considered by the CQU AUT study. That's fine, they were not commissioned to do that. But any use of the study needs to be balanced, and needs to be caveated, and needs to take into account both sides of the equation. Number of other technical issues that we highlight and concerns we have about the CQU AUT study. I won't go into them in detail, but the population sample they used was biased. It wasn't just a random survey. Participants were self-selected themselves. Some of their tools they used were quite biased. For example, the surveys, some of the questions had prompts telling people what was the answer they should give. You know, quite extraordinary. The answer to this question is probably yes. That was what people were told when they did the survey. They didn't conduct sensitivity analysis. Always uncertainty out there. Why don't we do some just standard sensitivity, check for the robustness of the findings? They didn't verify the validity of some of their novel methods. Omitted variables in the econometrics. Now that's a technical term, but it's simply saying that when you're trying to explain harm, you can't just say it's all due to one factor and leave out the other factors. If those other factors are correlated with gambling, but you only put in gambling, then all the harm will be associated with gambling. You'll attribute all the problem to gambling and ignore the fact that actually maybe it's only 20% gambling and 50% alcohol or 30% smoking or whatever. Incomplete reporting of methods and empirical findings. We even despite the fact it was over 200 pages long, some of the standard information we would expect to see in the report was missing. Excluding data that suggested unexpectedly small harm from gambling. And then, most importantly, failure to adequately warn about the limitations of the study, of the empirical estimates. So what do we conclude overall from all this? We believe that the CQU AUT studies the results should not be considered reliable. We think they're serious overestimates, and certainly if for any use in policy, the policy has to consider not just the costs, but also the benefits of gambling. And in our view, unfortunately, the CQU AUT study is not fit for purpose. It's not fit for use. Thank you. Welcome any questions you have. I'll pass it back.